Change on the Wind by TMoore. A short story of love and loss shared between a grandmother and a granddaughter. The sting of summer's stifling heat was beginning to give way into autumn's chill. The wind whipped like a belt slicing through the air. She sat alone in a creaking rocking chair on the front porch. She had comfort in the bite of the wind and in that rhythmic sound of the chair. She had not experienced much comfort in the past 3 years. She was battle weary. She had been on edge ever since that wretched doctor uttered the word cancer. At first, she had not believed that fancy man, but slowly she had watched her Charlie fade away. He was no longer the strapping man that she had married at the tender age of 15. It had been 3 days since her sweet Charlie had left the house and would never return. She was different, changed even. She thought herself like a canoe that she had once watched float upon the lake. She wandered aimlessly these days, dipping and threatening to capsize without notice. Her days stretched into each other. Morning or night made no difference to her any longer. It was only her, the wind, and that chair. All she could manage to wish for herself was to join her Charlie. If she could not be granted that one small wish, she wanted to just be alone. The second wish was granted. Everyone came, and then they went. They tried to keep their voices low during the arguments as to who got what now that he was gone. She heard them all. She would dream that the cold wind would come and snatch her up and take her far away. Yet each morning she awoke into the same world, even lonelier than the day before. The days of making beds and cooking hearty breakfasts were gone. She often chose only coffee for herself. These daily tasks no longer held anything special for her. She could not care less whether she bathed or even slightly looked presentable. She would sit in that rocker and go miles and miles without ever leaving the porch. She often thought back to the days. She was sure that she could hear her long-gone mother calling. Her voice carried on the winds. She longed to return to her mother. They always knew how to make things better. Sure, they could tell her. More than 700 miles away, the grandchild that she had mostly raised sat in painful silence. The granddaughter knew that she had lost herself along the way. It hurt her that she could not, or maybe it would be more honest to say, would not, figure out how to find herself again. She would sometimes call the old woman, but mostly she was too busy. After all, she had a family, a job to look after, and more problems than she could count. She simply could not waste time on phone calls. Sometimes the granddaughter would even travel back to her hometown, but she could not make herself go see the old woman. When the granddaughter would visit, the awkwardness and silence were suffocating. Seeing the old woman made her feel sadness intertwined with great guilt. Even telephone conversations were few and far between. Those times she would call, the granddaughter would be short-tempered and would end up snapping at the old woman. She didn't mean to. It just seemed to happen that way. The old woman she knew and loved was gone. There was no sparkle left in her eye. She didn't talk or teach any longer. All she did was rock in that accursed chair and wait. The granddaughter was not sure what she was waiting on, but she hated it just the same. Then it happened. Suddenly, the old woman was sick. She went into the hospital. The granddaughter didn't pay it much mind. She thought back to all the times before that the old woman would be sick. She thought her a hypochondriac. Surely this would be like all the other times. She called once, but the old woman couldn't stay awake long enough to talk to her. The granddaughter was just too busy to make the drive. She was certain that the old woman would return home shortly, and she would visit when she could spare a few days. One night there was a terrible storm. Trees were twisted and tossed here and there. The power went out. When morning came, the granddaughter awoke and stepped into the new day. The sky was calm and brought a promise of peace, but the wind felt as if it could cut her to shreds. She knew that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The granddaughter was busy trying to wrangle children into their proper school drop offs. She almost didn't accept the call. The way the wind tangled her hair made her stop and answer. The old woman was gone. How could this be? The old woman had cried wolf for years. The girl always thought that it was for attention, but now the granddaughter was just numb to the pain that her children felt as she shooed them out of the car into their school day. It was as if she were alone in this loss. It didn't even enter her brain that her children would be suffering too. Off she went to work. She could not bear the thought of being home alone. Pain filled her heart, and her brain kept bringing memories upon memories of all the times that she spoke harshly or simply didn't have time for the old woman. The granddaughter was now the canoe threatening to capsize. Years went by. The granddaughter was consumed with guilt. There were so many things that she wished that she could go back and do differently. It tormented her day and night that she didn't make the time. At times she would cry and claw at her hair. Did the old woman know how much the granddaughter loved her? Every time a harsh wind hit her in the face, the granddaughter would be reminded, only to dissolve into tears. They say that time heals all wounds, but the granddaughter didn't believe that for one moment. Yes, time reduces the sting, but it never leaves. And time brings some measure of acceptance. The wind still reminds her every single time, but after all these years, days of pain and tears are few and far between. There are even some days that the girl can face the wind and smile.